My father didn't just throw me out of the house that night. He threw me out of his life. He looked at me with a cold, jagged disgust that I can still feel in my bones 24 years later. He reached into his leather wallet, pulled out a $50 bill, and threw it into the mud at my feet. He told me to go buy a new name because the Sterling name didn't have room for a girl like me anymore. I didn't beg, I didn't cry. I just picked up that dirty bill, wiped the mud off on my jeans, and told him that one day I would buy his name back from him. Now, I'm standing in my glass office in Seattle looking at the rain. When the security feed pings, 2 people are standing at my front door. They look older, gray, and desperate. But I'd know those faces anywhere. I just leaned into the intercom, my voice as calm as a frozen lake, and asked them, "What child? What on earth are you talking about?" Before to know who was part of our community. Columbus, Ohio, 24 years ago. The air in our dining room tasted like burnt roast and suppressed rage. The clock on the mantel struck 7. Each tick sounding like a hammer hitting a nail. My name is Brianna Sterling, and that night I learned that the people who gave you life can be the first ones to take it away. I was 17, I was scared, and I was pregnant. I had spent the entire afternoon rehearsing how to tell them, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the bond of blood would mean something. But when the words finally left my lips, the silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. My father, Gregory, didn't move. He just stared at me as if I were a piece of fruit that had rotted on his expensive walnut table. My mother, Susan, didn't look at me at all. She just kept folding her napkin over and over until her knuckles were white. Gregory finally spoke, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You have ruined this name, Brianna. Do you have any idea what you've done to our standing in the city?" I tried to explain that Ethan and I would take responsibility, but I just needed help to finish school. I reached out for my mother's hand, but she pulled away as if my touch were contagious. 10 minutes, Gregory said. He didn't yell. That would have been too human for him. He just reached into his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill. "Take this and leave. If you walk out that door, you are no longer a Sterling. You are nothing." I looked at my mother, pleading with my eyes for her to say something, anything, but she just stood up, walked to the fireplace, and turned our family photo face down. The soft click of the frame hitting the wood sounded like a casket closing. I remember the rain. It wasn't a drizzle. It was a cold, punishing downpour that soaked through my thin jacket. Hit in seconds. I stood on the porch, my hands trembling around the strap of a single trash bag filled with clothes. I heard the lock click behind me, a sharp final sound that told me the world I knew was gone. I stood there in the mud, staring at that $50 bill in my hand. It was the price they put on my life. My father had just used me as a tax write-off, a bad investment he was cutting loose. I didn't cry. The rain was doing that for me. Everything stayed silent for days after I found a bus station. But in my head, Gregory's words kept echoing. I ended up in a cheap motel in Seattle, shivering and alone. That was where I met Evelyn. She was the owner, a woman with eyes that had seen 1,000 storms and a heart that was made of iron. She found me collapsed in the hallway of her motel, clutching my stomach. She didn't ask for my ID. She didn't ask for my story. She just wrapped me in a warm blanket and sat me down with a cup of tea. I told her everything. I told her I was a mistake, a disgrace, a girl with no future. Evelyn looked at me, her gaze steady, and said words that I would eventually carve into the foundation of my company. She leaned in and whispered, "Brianna, listen to me. They didn't vote Beyond. They didn't throw you away. They're just losing the privilege of watching you shine. From this moment on, you don't belong to them. You belong to the woman you're about to become." That night, for the first time since Columbus, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a secret weapon. I looked at that muddy $50 bill on the nightstand and made a silent vow. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to build something so powerful that they would have to beg for a seat at my table. Building a life from scratch isn't a cinematic montage. It's a slow, grinding war against your own exhaustion. After Evelyn took me in, I worked 18 hours a day at her hotel. I scrubbed toilets until my hands were raw. And I hauled laundry until my back felt like it would snap. But every night when the guests were asleep and the lobby was silent, I sat behind the front desk and opened a battered laptop Evelyn had given me. I didn't study art or literature. I studied data. I studied the way numbers move, the way they hide, and the way they tell the truth when people lie. I became obsessed with the logic of it. People are messy and emotional. But a database is honest. A year into my new life, the crushing weight of reality hit me. I lost the baby. The doctor said it was a combination of extreme stress and malnutrition from those first few weeks on the street. I remember sitting in that cold clinic room, clutching a small woven cord bracelet Evelyn had made for me. I didn't cry. My heart felt like it had been turned into a block of granite. I didn't have room for grief because I was too busy fueling my rage. As the years passed, my talent for data architecture turned into a career and then into an empire. I founded Elysium Data Systems. We didn't just manage information, we hunted it. By 35, I was the person the giants of industry called when they needed to find a leak. But there was a secret I kept even from Evelyn. During those first 10 years of success, I wasn't just hoarding wealth. I was playing a game of shadows with my father. Gregory Sterling thought he was clever. Before he kicked me out, he had used my social security number to kazan on several massive gambling debts and failing business loans. He thought he'd, left me with a lead weight around my neck that would keep me underwater forever. I didn't sue him, not then. Instead, I spent millions of my own hard-earned money quietly buying up those debts. Every time a collection agency came knocking on his door, they didn't realize they were talking to a shell company owned by the daughter he discarded. I paid off every cent not out of love, but for a reason far more calculated. This was my invisible debt. I wanted to make sure that when the day of reckoning came, there wouldn't be a single thread, not a dollar, not a legal document, not a memory linking me to him. I was buying my freedom, one interest payment at a time. I was clearing the ledger so that when I finally struck, it would be clinical. While I was living in a world of cold logic and rising skyscrapers, the stirrings were rotting from the inside out. I kept tabs on them like a scientist watching a virus in a petri dish. Gregory's company was a hollow shell built on vanity and bad credit. Susan was still playing the part of the Columbus socialite, hosting charity galas with money they didn't actually have. They were living on borrowed time, and I was the one who owned the clock. I thought I had reached the end of my journey when I finally paid off the last of Gregory's secret debts. I thought I was done with them. But then the news broke about the Evelyn Foundation and the massive trust she left in my name for displaced youth. The Sterling saw the dollar signs, and like vultures sensing a dying animal, they started circling. They didn't just want a piece of my success. They wanted to reclaim me like a lost asset. And they were willing to use the most disgusting lie imaginable to do it. 24 years of silence ended with a knock that sounded like a demand. I watched the security monitor in my Seattle penthouse as Gregory and Susan Sterling stood there dressed in layers of expensive wool that couldn't hide the decay of their spirits. They looked like an apology, but I knew better. They were a sales pitch. When I opened the door, the air between us turned brittle. Gregory didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention the 2 decades of rain he'd left me to drown in. He just looked past me into my home. His eyes hungry for a legacy he hadn't earned. "Let us see the child," he said, his voice thick with a fake practiced warmth. My mother, Susan, reached out as if to touch my arm, her face twisting into a mask of maternal concern. "We've forgiven so much, Brianna," she whispered. The gaslighting so effortless it was almost impressive. It's time to be a family again. A story like this, eh? Reunion, it would be so powerful. Think of your son. Think of the Sterling name.